Hi, Michael from Doing Life Together. Hope you are well. Hope you are having a fantastic week and so good to spend these few moments with you today. Last week in this series, we looked at this idea of how do you and I live intentionally? That is, there's only so much time, so much energy, so much we can put into a day, put into our weeks. So we need to be intentional about where we invest our time, our energy, our resources. How do we do that? This week we want to build on that a little bit by unpacking how do you and I as human beings find our place in the larger story of this world. You see, there's a growing body of evidence in the wellbeing literature that suggests that you and I and every other human being find a great deal of ourself, our identity, who we are, our sense of connection, our sense of belonging, our sense of purpose, our sense of well-being, when we find a way to connect ourselves to a story bigger than ourselves. There's an old proverb that talks around the idea that what's inside of us is ultimately what comes out when we connect with other people, when we go about our work, our life, our family. And if what's inside of us is about serving ourselves, in other words, our ego, our agenda, our desires, behaviours such as empire building, talking about ourselves constantly, turning every conversation towards ourselves, using I and me in every conversation we have become part of our life, part of our norm. And we see these cultures building in teams, in organisations, in schools, in communities. These behaviours, although useful for ourselves, are not always useful to create a larger purpose, a larger story. But when we find a way to connect ourselves to the larger human experience, the bigger human story, our behaviours change. The way we interact changes. We stop using I and me and we start talking about the team, the group, the community. We start talking about our fellow human beings, our peers, our colleagues. We learn to listen, to hear story and to understand, rather than to respond and to find our place. We start to move away from empire building and talk about the greater good, talk about what would it look like to serve the greater good, to serve the greater human story. See, these thoughts change our life, they change the way we operate, they change the way we connect. So how do we go about finding our place in that greater human story? Well, we often talk about how every single human being has unique gifts and talents and skills and abilities and capacity. We talked about this when we reflected on the principle, the concept of story. We each bring that to our day-to-day life, to our families, to our organisations, to our schools, to our teams. And it seems as though for every human being, that unique story, that unique capacity allows you to play a fairly unique role in the larger human story. It also seems that when we are intentional about encouraging one another, seeing those gifts in people, drawing them out, growing those gifts in people, and just more generally growing the people around us in our teams, organisations, schools and communities, we get a different response. We start creating a different sense of community. When we remove our banners, our logos, our ideas and our protective behaviours, we start to get to a place where something more important comes forward. So this week, take some time to think about your story. Start to think about what's your role? What do you play in this greater, grander human story? How do you add? How do you serve other human beings? How do you do that? And if it helps, use this question as a prompt. You see, in ancient Middle Eastern cultures, one of the things they used to do, and used to do a lot, or one of the most incredible things you could do for one of your guests who had travelled a long way, was to get down and wash their feet. And so I often find myself and ask others, in trying to find a place in this larger story, what does it look like for me to wash the feet of my fellow human beings and find a way to serve? We hope this has been helpful. We hope you have a great week, and we look forward to wrapping up this series in the next week or so, when next we meet.